Elusive and somewhat mysterious Camp David has played double duty for more than a dozen U.S. presidents. From hosting foreign dignitaries in a relaxed setting to serving as nerve center for major policy decisions. And for former Reagan press secretary Mark Weinberg, a home away from home.
On Friday afternoons, we would get on the helicopter on the south lawn of the White House. The president would wave to everybody and then disappear, essentially for 48 hours.
In his book, Movie Nights with the Reagans, Weinberg fondly recalls those weekend getaways at Camp David.
Abandon ship! Open all deck hatches!
An actor himself, those movie nights at Aspen Lodge allowed the president to relive his years on the silver screen. The Reagans viewed hundreds of films during their time at Camp David, from Guess Who's Coming to Dinner to Crocodile Dundee.
That's not a knife. That's a knife.
Sometimes the art imitated life, like the aftermath of Rocky IV.
And this was at the time that, the Cold War was really heating up, to use a phrase. So it did have an influence. And at one point, the Russians, the Soviets, told the Americans, complained to American diplomats about Rocky IV. They said, "Why, you shouldn't show that. That's not a good movie to show." The president told us this. The American diplomat said to the Soviets, "Well, we don't have anything to do with that. In our country, the government doesn't control the movies." And they couldn't understand that.
Sometimes the movies influence platforms. Case in point, the 1980 film 9 to 5.
Because there was a scene with Dolly Parton and Jane Fonda and I believe Lily Tomlin smoking marijuana. And you have to remember, this was the 80s. It was illegal back then. And this movie glamorized it, and he thought that was a terrible message to send to young people. And Mrs. Reagan was so bothered by it that she called them out on it in a speech.
That iconic scene pushed the First Lady further into her anti-drug agenda, and those famous 3 words.
Just say no.
Weinberg says despite the media's narrative of a cold First Lady, those moments gave him a glimpse into the relationship between Nancy and her Ronnie.
She was very warm and welcoming. She took an interest in people. She listened when you were in the room. She was protective of her husband, as well she should have been.
While the Reagans loved their privacy, that didn't stop the press from going to great lengths to catch a glimpse of the president.
They took the lens that they used for the space shuttle, the biggest lens that CBS owned. They brought them out there so they could get the president riding on this horse, this wavy figure in the heat. And he knew it. And he said, "I'm going to have some fun with them." And he did this and pretended to fall off the horse.
Weinberg fondly recalls Reagan's famous sense of humor, even with the media.
For our friends in the press who place a high premium on accuracy, let me say, I did not actually hear George Washington say that.
While Mrs. Reagan usually decided which film to review, Mr. Reagan found a particular love of An Extraterrestrial and his best friend, Elliot.
E.T. was a movie that touched both of their hearts. They had tears in their eyes at the end. It was a very wonderful story, a fantastic story in the literal sense of the word. And those kinds of themes of letting your imagination go wherever it could and believing in the impossible and wondering what was out there and wondering what the future could be, those were very Reagan-esque themes.
Even after the credits rolled on the Reagans' time in the White House, those weekend getaways forged a friendship that would last until the end.
And I told him that I was considering leaving the staff after having been there 10 years, that it was time for me to move on. And he said, "Well, I understand. You're a young man. I expect you to do that. And by the way, Mark, I'm not going to be here forever." Well, I knew what he meant, but I didn't want to acknowledge that.
Still, Weinberg says Reagan was at peace with this life and the next.
He said, "Mark, it's okay. I'm not afraid of that. And in fact, I look forward to it." Because he knew that God had a plan for him and that he lived a life on earth and would be reunited with people after. And he was very grounded because of his faith.
Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.